earlier and I forgot to plug my phone in. It died. Now, sir. And we are on chapter 24, entitled The Target Hour Arrives. Spirit Flyer Series, Book 2, The Toy Campaign, chapter 24. The target hour arrives. The children and all the townspeople gathered out by the baseball field at the Centerville School on the east side of town. The crowd formed just outside of right field. The band sat up on chairs just beyond the foul line in right field itself. Far beyond the band, way out on the other side of left field, the volunteer fire department stood ready by the waiting fireworks. The people came in cars and trucks and bicycles and on foot. They gathered under a darkening sky. The clouds hung low and threatening. No one knew what they contained, yet the people came, putting down blankets and big ice chests for their evening picnics. Some families backed their pickup trucks toward the field and let their tailgates for makeshift picnic tables. This year was different than all the ones before, however, in that many children brought their new Goliath toys to the field. Everywhere you looked, there were girls clutching dolls and holding balls, and boys with faster blasters and action figures and all sorts of things. Yet none of the children were playing together. Most of them seemed tense and suspicious, as if someone were about to snatch their prized possessions away. The faces of the children looked as uncertain as the clouds overhead. Catherine and Lois and Aunt Bernice arrived with the crowd. The children had come in the car and argued all the way about whose Sissy Sassy doll was better. Aunt Bernice was upset because John and Susan had apparently run off somewhere against her explicit extravagance, scolded the two girls and tried to ignore the problem. She had made ham and cheese sandwiches and was quite hungry since it was past supper time. I wonder where John and Susan are, Lois asked. Who cares, Catherine replied. I don't like Susan anymore because she said all those mean things about my dolly. Yes, she is snooty, Lois agreed. Aunt Bernice spread out an old quilt on the grassy ground. Catherine and Lois both wanted to sit on the left front corner and argued about it until Aunt Bernice told them no one could sit on that corner. Both children stood in angry silence, blaming each other for the punishment. Lois pulled the string on her Sissy Sassy Sally doll and pointed it at Catherine. Sissy Sassy Sally says you made a big mistake, ugly, the little doll chirped. I did not, Catherine said, and don't call me ugly. Catherine pulled the string on her own doll and faced it toward Lois. Sissy Sassy Sally says you stink and need your diaper changed, the little doll said. The blank staring doll eyes almost seemed to squint for a moment. I do not, Lois screamed. She was ready to scratch Catherine as hard as she could when Aunt Bernice came between them. Just then the band began to get ready. The conductor stood on a small wooden platform and waved his baton. The national anthem began and all the people stood up proudly. High above, a black crow flew in circles, looking down on the crowd below. The cloudy sky rumbled with distant thunder. The band played song after song and the crowd applauded each patriotic tune. The sun went down and the sky got dark quicker than usual because of the clouds. Then the mayor stood up to speak. A microphone on a pole was brought over. Thank you, band. Thank you, Mr. Brooks, our fine conductor, the mayor said. The crowd clapped. A clarinet squeaked. As the band plays their last number, the fireworks will begin, the mayor said. The crowd clapped and cheered, but this year we have a special treat. By now we're all aware of the newly remodeled toy store in town. The new name of entertainment and fun is Happy Toys. The children in the crowd screamed and clapped their approval. We're especially proud to welcome Mrs. Happy, the new owner of the store. She is associated with Goliath Toys, the fine company which is sponsoring a special display of fireworks this year. I've been told we are in for a treat. More applause and cheers drifted through the crowd. And speaking of Goliath Toys, the mayor said proudly, many of you may know that Goliath Industries, the parent company of Goliath Toys, has recently bought the old factory here in town. In the near future, they will be gearing up for production to complete several government contracts. A huge roar of applause spread through the crowd as the mayor beamed. He took out a handkerchief and wiped his face. Centerville, of course, welcomes Goliath to our community with open arms, the mayor said. Besides this delightful display of fireworks, Goliath has also planned some other beneficial gifts to our community, which will also be announced in the near future. So let me now introduce our newest and already one of our most beloved citizens, especially by you children, Mrs. Happy. The children all stood on their feet as Mrs. Happy walked over to the microphone and into the spotlight. The adults also stood up and clapped. Mrs. Happy looked out over the crowd and smiled warmly. At that moment, big tubs of Sweet Temptation candies were being passed through the crowds. The children took fistfuls and stuffed them in their mouths, pockets in their mouths. Thank you for your kind welcome, Mrs. Happy said, her voice echoing out of the speakers. It's fitting that on this day that celebrates freedom, we are gathered together. Every Independence Day is special, but I know this one will be a day long remembered for me. Your welcome and permission to share the celebration with a display of Goliath fireworks means more to me than I can express. So without further delay, on with the show. The children clapped in thunderous applause. The crowd cheered. Many children held their toys over their heads and waved them. Mrs. Happy smiled as she looked out over their faces. She carefully searched the crowd, looking for Susan and John Kramer. Just then, Barry Smedlow and the Cobra Club rode their bicycles between the cars and trucks and quilts, all the way to the front of the crowd. Mrs. Happy stepped away from the microphone. The big field lights went dark at that moment, except for a few small lights focused on the band. The field was dark. As the band played a rousing Sousa march, the fireworks began. A rocket shot high into the air and exploded into an umbrella of stars that were red, white, and blue. A breeze scattered the stars across the sky. The citizens of Centerville cheered with satisfaction. They ate and drank, toasting their freedom and all the good things that they possessed. Another rocket exploded against the darkness into many lights. Mrs. Happy looked on a sea of upturned faces and smiled with so much pleasure that for a moment her eyes seemed to glow red. Gee, I wonder how that happened. At the same time, Susan and John were in the garage at home working on his Spirit Flyer. When they shot out of the deeper world, the beam of light led right to the Kramer's garage. We need to fix your bike, Susan said. This must be the way we were brought here. But don't we need to warn the town about how Mrs. Happy will enlist everyone tonight, just like we saw her doing in the deeper world? John asked. Yes, said Susan, but we can't make the same mistake of trying to do the king's work with an incomplete Spirit Flyer. John nodded. The Spirit Flyer was a mess. John felt terrible when he realized how badly he had treated the old bicycle. The children went to work quickly. John took off the Goliath faster blaster and the combo gizmo, and they replaced the melted tires of the old red bike with the good tires from Mr. Kramer's Spirit Flyer. Dad won't care, Susan said, if they're done. You can get him some new tires tomorrow. We've got to get out to the school. You put on the gear lever, John said, and looked down at his sneakers. I made such a mess of it last time. It's okay now, Susan said and smiled. She patted John on the back. You can bolt on the light and horn and mirror. I'll hook up the generator, too. I wonder what it does, John said. Who knows, Susan said, but we'll find out when we're ready, I suppose. Let's hurry. The children were quietly passing wrenches and pliers back and forth. Susan strung the gear lever cable to the back wheel, looking at her own Spirit Flyer as a model. As she tightened the last bolt on the generator, a distant boom filled the air. The children ran to the front of the garage. The fireworks have begun, John said. We need to get over there soon. We've got to keep working, Susan said seriously. I just need to attach the horn, John replied. Another boom echoed in the distance. As Susan worked, she whispered her urgent and deepest wishes to the kings. Out at the field, the last regular rocket shot up and exploded into a star, which exploded into more stars. The crowd clapped. In the darkest darkness, the mayor grabbed the microphone. And now for our very special display, courtesy of Goliath Toys, he said. His voice was drowned out by the cheers and applause of the crowd. A stirring breeze blew across the field. The fire chief lit the fuse for the Goliath display. The first rocket went up higher and higher until everyone thought it was probably a dud. Then with a big boom, the rocket exploded just below the clouds into what seemed like 1,000 purple stars. Then those stars popped into more stars. The crowd clapped at the wonder. The whole town of Centerville seemed to be covered with burning stars. Then someone said, "Look, it's words." And so it was. In fiery letters, the stars spelled the toy campaign. The crowd murmured with wonder. It only lasted for a few seconds, then the stars began to fade into ashes. The ashes trickled down over the whole town, as another rocket went up. This time the stars formed into the shape of a tiny person. "It's a doll," they shouted. Then the doll faded to ashes, which dropped down, still smoking. The next rocket went even higher and made the image of a bicycle. At that moment, the wind blew and the bicycle began to move across the sky until it faded into smoke and ashes. Though most smoke moves upward, this smoke drifted down over the crowd. A few people coughed, their eyes watering. Another rocket whizzed upward. Another rocket whizzed upward. This time it exploded into the image of a puppet. The breeze made the puppet seem like it was dancing on its strings before it was lost in the wind. The crowd applauded wildly, though more and more were coughing from the smoke. Then a rapid burst of explosions sent several rockets into the air. Every expectant eye was on the darkness when it exploded into glorious pictures of toys of all sorts. There were bicycles and dolls and balls and bats and trains and airplanes. No one had ever seen such a display of fireworks. Children pointed and licked their lips as they sucked on the sweet temptation candies. For a moment, everyone seemed to forget they were only looking at dots of light. With their eyes blurry from the thick smoke, something about the images which made them seem more than toys. Something about the images made them seem like more than toys. And while the images of toys floated high in the air in sparkling fire, another surge of rockets were shooting up into the sky. for the final display. A gust of wind whipped through the sky when the rockets exploded higher than all the rest in a horrible flash and deafening roar as loud as bombs in battle. The crowd waited anxiously to see what image the burning stars would make. Everyone gasped when they saw the giant hood and the long, curvy bottle of the cobra. "Wow, Barry," said Doug Barnes. The giant snake swayed over the edge of town with the breeze almost making it look alive. It spun and turned as the wind suddenly picked up. The crowd clapped and applauded and shouted at the wonder above them. But the burning stars still didn't go dark. The wind only made them burn brighter as the smoke of fire began twisting wildly in the black, cloud-filled sky. With an open mouth, it moved toward the lingering display of all the toys. Then, to everyone's amazement, the snake seemed to eat the display of toys, and it was a tragic bite. Wildberry, Smedlow said, his eyes reflecting the red and purple stars above him. By then, the smoke was thick in the crowd. Ashes fell down over the crowd, as if the towering snake were shedding its scales. Then, in a whoosh, a ball of fire seemed to shoot right up through the belly of the snake and out its mouth, shooting like lightning through the sky. A boom as loud as thunder cracked the air. Someone screamed, then the twisting snake rose taller into the air. "I don't like this," the fire chief said to his assistant. "Get the hose. That thing looks like it's coming down." The people in the crowd were all looking up when the giant snake, came twisting down like a tornado of fire. The eyes of the serpent glowed, and the mouth seemed to open once more as it fell toward the earth. The wind was suddenly fierce on the field. All at once everyone began to scream. The siren of the fire engine began to blow, which seemed to increase the panic. Some people began to run, but most could only stare up into the sky, hypnotized by the red eyes. The snake of fire whipped back and forth over the crowd as if waiting to strike. Then, with the sound of rockets, the giant mouth came down, its jaws opening wider and wider. The mouth alone seemed bigger than the whole Centerville school building. The firemen ran toward the crowd as the snake fell. So much smoke was in the air that most people couldn't see clearly by that time. The band members rushed toward the crowd. The jaws of fire opened behind them as the head of the shadowy serpent hissed downward through the smoke and panic. Then the bottom of the jaw of the snake touched the earth, singeing the grass with fire. At that instant, the town of Centerville froze in time. In that split between normal ticking seconds, the darkness of the deeper world had broken through like an ugly dream. Everywhere, all over the fields, people stood like statues, stopped as if asleep. Some were balanced on one leg as if they were running away. Others had their mouths open as they looked upward with their eyes closed. The whole town was like one big photograph, no sound, no movement. Only the snake burning on the field seemed alive. Its huge fire-red eyes looked on the helpless people before it. But not all was stillness. Mrs. Happy came walking out of the crowd of sleeping statues with the black crow perched on her shoulder. "The target day has arrived," she said to the bird with satisfaction in her voice. She held a long hook in her hands about the size of a garden hoe. Her hook was connected to a chain which was connected to a puppet about 2 feet tall that wore the face of Barry Smedlow. The chain went on down from Barry the puppet to the next puppet, which looked like Jimmy Roundhouse, which went to the next puppet, number 3, who was Doug Barnes. From puppet to puppet, the chain traveled on, connecting them in the order of their numbers. Each puppet wore the face of the child who had given permission earlier that day in the toy store. One after another, the puppets marched, each bearing the face of a child of Centerville, each linked together by the chain. "Ah, freedom," Mrs. Happy said as she pulled the marching puppets across the field to the open mouth of the waiting fiery serpent. "This is more like it. When they think they are most free, they are the most blind to their slavery." Oh boy. What a moment. Add a few toys and we'll get Decisions for Darkness, blood on the dotted line. Then Barry Smedlow puppet marched on deep into the mouth of the snake. Mrs. Happy released her hook and the puppets kept marching, one after the other, deep into the belly of the dark serpent. As the puppets marched, she walked back to the little wooden bandstand that the conductor had stood on. She waved her long hook in the air like a conductor listening to silent music. One by one, the puppets marched into the deep darkness of the gigantic snake as Mrs. Happy conducted, a smile on her face. The last 2 puppets to be dragged along bore the faces of Little Catherine and Lois Kramer, number 562 and 563. The chain in front of the Catherine puppet was held together by a broken link. Yet with continuous pressure, the chain pulled the puppet along as if it weren't broken at all. Behind the last puppet, which wore the face of Lois Kramer, a length of loose, broken chain dragged in the dirt. A pile of fluff and doll hair and cloth was all that remained of the last puppet. Mrs. Happy stooped when she saw the mangled chain and the destroyed remains of the last puppet. "The boy, the girl," she guessed. "Where's the boy? His puppet is not intact." "The girl I knew, but not the boy." "The order of the chains unravels," the crow taunted. "Target day? Ha! Perhaps you collected signatures before they were given." "Shut up, you featherhead," the old woman snapped. Her eyes glowed red as she searched the crowd of Centerville. Citizens trapped in time. The parade of puppets moved past her. Mrs. Happy jumped off the bandstand. She looked around quickly once more. "We must hurry. They can't have broken through," she said to the crow. She turned back to the snake. As the puppet of Lois Kramer marched mechanically into the darkness, A blue light began to glow deep inside the burning serpent. Through the smoke-filled air and darkness, glistening new toys appeared deep inside the snake. A jumble of baseball gloves and balls and bats and action figures and dolls and all sorts of delights, fresh out of their boxes, were heaped together like a mountain of treasure. The very Smedlow puppet reached the mountain first, since he was the number one puppet. And the instant the little puppet touched the first toy, a spark shot through the links of its chain, as if it was plugged into an electric socket. The spark shot down the chain from puppet to puppet. The little 2-foot puppets began to run all at once, each one pulling harder on the one behind. Mrs. Happy smiled, then looked out at the crowd. The real Barry Smedlow had begun to move. He walked forward, his eyes shut as if asleep. He was followed by Jimmy Roundhouse, who also appeared asleep, followed by the rest of the Cobra Club. And after the Cobra Club came the other children, one by one in the order of their numbers. The children's sleepers formed a long line as they marched toward the gaping mouth of the fire serpent. Hurry, Mrs. Happy commanded. She stared out through the smoke-filled darkness. The adults of the town all stood still, helplessly locked in their sleep. Yet not all were quiet. A few adults made sounds of weeping and crying. Weeping and crying. Quickly now, the old woman commanded. One by one, the children walked away from their families and joined the parade of sleepwalkers as their numbers came up. On they marched, both arms reaching out, yet holding nothing. A dark, almost invisible chain linked the children together. The deeper they walked into the younger serpent, the clearer the chain appeared. Okay. And that brings us to chapter 25. I'm not going to read it. 2 spirit flyers. And then chapter 26, cause for celebration. And then chapter 27, closed for inventory. And 28, the greatest gift of all. I think that's probably the last one I would imagine. So that was chapter 24, and there are 28 chapters, so 4 more chapters. And then we're done with that book. Alright. Let's see if anybody's on. Other than last night, I off late last night. Alright, well. Can't let. I'm not going to rotate the device.